Imagine walking into a town hall meeting where two sides are screaming at each other. On the left, people are demanding radical redistribution and social protections. On the right, they're shouting for order, security, and the preservation of the state. It's chaotic, loud, and deeply uncomfortable. Then a man stands up in the middle. He's calm, well-dressed, and speaks with a soothing, authoritative tone. He tells the room that both sides are emotional and outdated. He says the real answer isn't left or right, it's just common sense and reality. Suddenly, the room goes quiet. The tension vanishes. It feels like a relief, right? Like someone finally brought adulthood back to the room. But look closer at what just happened. That man didn't actually solve the disagreement between the workers and the owners, or the rural and the urban. He didn't mediate the conflict, he deleted it. He branded anyone with a strong conviction as radical, and declared the status quo to be the only objective truth. On January 16, 2026, we saw the birth of the Centrist Reform Alliance, a merger that promises to bring this exact brand of moderation to the forefront of politics. We're told this is the sensible center, the safe harbor from extremism. But there is a hidden danger in this kind of purity. In the past, giants of Japanese politics like Kakue Tanaka ran what they called a general hospital, a messy, contradictory space where the far left and the far right actually sat at the same table to haggle over interests. It wasn't neither left nor right, it was both. Today, that inclusive chaos is being replaced by something much colder, extreme centrism. It's a political posture that wraps itself in the flag of neutrality while quietly privatizing the truth and excluding the majority from the conversation. When we stop fighting over ideas because we're told ideology is dead, who actually wins? And is this new alliance a bridge between divides or a wall designed to keep the most urgent voices out?
That silence you described in the opening, it's heavy. It's almost seductive, isn't it?
Seductive is the perfect word.
The idea that if we just, stop shouting, the problems will just evaporate. But the premise we are exploring today is that the silence isn't a solution at all. It's a symptom of something much more rigid and, much more dangerous than the chaos it replaced.
It's definitely seductive. I mean, I think if you stop 10 people on the street right now and ask them, do you want politicians to stop fighting and just get to work? I'd bet 9 of them would say yes without even thinking about it.
Absolutely.
We are conditioned to see conflict as a failure of the system. But what we're going to dive into today, specifically through the lens of Sato's recent analysis and this idea of extreme centrism, it really challenges that fundamental assumption. It suggests that the fighting is the work. That's what politics is.
And we have to be really, really careful with our terms here because centrism usually implies, a midpoint, a compromise between two extremes. We think of it as the average, the reasonable middle ground.
The safe choice.
The safe choice. But Sato, and he's drawing on thinkers like Tariq Ali here, is describing something completely different. He makes this crucial distinction between what he calls inclusive centrism, that's the general hospital model you mentioned, and this new thing, extreme centrism.
Okay, let's dig into that distinction right away, because I think for most people, the center is just the center. How can the middle of the road possibly be extreme? It sounds like a contradiction.
It does, but it makes sense when you look at the function. So think about the general hospital metaphor again. Kakue Tanaka's politics in post-war Japan. They weren't about everyone agreeing. It was a mechanism for managing genuine, deep-seated ideological conflicts.
So you had actual communists and actual, hardline nationalists in the same system.
In the same system. You had socialists who wanted to completely dismantle the capitalist structure, and you had hardline conservatives who wanted to enforce traditional hierarchies, maybe even remilitarize. Tanaka didn't stand up and tell them they were wrong to feel that way. He didn't call them emotional.
He didn't pathologize them.
No, he brought them into the hospital, the political institution, and they haggled. They traded favors. It was messy, it was often corrupt, let's be honest, and it was loud, so loud. But it was inclusive because it acknowledged that the disagreement was real and legitimate.
So the center in that scenario isn't a position on an ideological map. It's more like a container. It's the room where the fight is allowed to happen.
It's the container. It validates the conflict as the core of the political process. Now, contrast that with extreme centrism. This is what we're seeing with this new alliance. And frankly, it's been the dominant mode across much of the Western world for the last 30 years.
Since the end of the Cold War, basically.
Since the end of history, narrative took hold. This version of the center doesn't mediate the conflict. It denies that the conflict is even legitimate to begin with. It looks at the left and the right, and it says, you aren't just wrong. You are irrational. You are emotional. You're stuck in the past. You are out of touch with reality.
Right. It turns politics into a math problem. The centrist stands up and says, I have the data, I have the experts from the right think tanks, and therefore I have the only correct answer.
And that right there is the privatization of truth. It's a critical concept. When you claim that your policy is just common sense or based on reality, you are removing it from the sphere of public debate. You are saying, we don't need to vote on this because there was only one right way to do it, and we, the experts, have found it.
And it effectively disenfranchises anyone who disagrees. It doesn't just defeat them in an argument, it labels them as enemies of reason itself.
You're not a political opponent anymore. You're a Luddite. You're a flat earther.
Because this sounds very compelling, but isn't there some truth to that? I mean, if we have mountains of economic data showing that a certain policy works, why should we debate it with someone whose opinion is based on, I don't know, a gut feeling? If my bridge is falling down, I don't want a town hall vote on how to fix it. I want an engineer to tell me the answer.
And that is the trap. That is the seductive logic of it. A bridge falling down is a physics problem. It has correct answers rooted in material science and engineering, but deciding which bridge to fix first or whether to spend that $1 billion on a bridge or a new hospital or whose neighborhood gets demolished to build the on-ramp, those are not physics problems.
Those are values.
Those are values problems. Those are political problems. They're about who wins and who loses. Extreme centrism's fundamental error, or perhaps its greatest trick, is treating values problems as if they were physics problems. It pretends that the distribution of wealth or the structure of our society or our national identity has a single scientific solution that can be found by a committee of technocrats.
And when you try to apply that rigid spreadsheet logic to messy, emotional, irrational human beings, you don't get efficiency. You get alienation. You get a sense that you have no say in your own life.
A profound sense of alienation. And that is exactly where I think we need to go next, because this isn't just abstract political theory happening in parliaments. This hits people in their daily lives, in their workplaces, and how they interact with the state itself. We're seeing this massive shift from the state as a lawmaker, as an arbiter of rules, to the state as a manager, or even, and this is the key, a therapist.
The therapeutic state.
That's the one.
Right. And to really understand what that feels like on a human level, not just as a theory, I want to share a story that came out of some of the research on administrative restructuring. It really grounded the whole concept for me. I heard about a man named Thomas, a middle manager in a sprawling government agency in London, who spends his days navigating what he calls the soft gray wall. Thomas recently shared online how his department underwent a radical deconfliction restructuring. Now, instead of debating the failing public infrastructure they were meant to fix, the office was flooded with well-being consultants and neutrality workshops. Whenever Thomas pointed out that the structural decay required a hard, ideological choice about funding and priorities, he was told his tone was disruptive to the consensus. Try to imagine the suffocating quiet of his life. He feels a sense of profound anomie, a rootless drifting where the state manages his emotions but ignores the collapsing bridges. As a journalist covering these shifts, I look at Thomas's frustration and I see the therapeutic state in action. It's a mechanism that swaps political solutions for psychological management. While the intensity of his resentment might feel sharp, even bordering on a rejection of modern bureaucratic empathy, we have to understand the source of his anger. From a place of political correctness, we value harmony, but when harmony is used to mask the fact that nothing is actually being repaired, the human spirit begins to wither under the weight of a forced artificial peace.
A forced artificial peace. Wow. That phrase, that really captures the essence of the problem, doesn't it?
Because it's this quiet desperation.
You know, on the surface, Thomas's complaint might sound trivial to some people. You can almost hear the cynical take, right? Oh, poor Thomas, he has to sit through a wellness workshop instead of arguing about budgets. What a tragedy. But we have to look deeper at what is actually being stripped away from him in that process.
It's the difference between being treated as a citizen and being treated as a patient.
This connects directly to what the sociologist Emil Durkheim was writing about a century ago with his concept of anomie. People often use that word to mean chaos or lawlessness, but Durkheim meant something much more specific and much more chilling. He meant normlessness. A state where the social structures that give our lives meaning and direction and purpose, they just break down or become artificial.
So it's not the absence of rules, it's the absence of meaningful rules.
Exactly. And here's the paradox. Conflict is a structure. Ideological struggle is a structure. when you fight for a policy, when you argue that we should prioritize Bridge A over Bridge B because it serves a poorer community, you are engaging in a moral act. You are defining what matters. You are part of a shared project.
You have agency. You are a participant in shaping the world, even if you lose the argument. The argument itself gives you a place.
Exactly. But look at what the agency did to Thomas. They didn't engage with his argument. They didn't say, Thomas, your data on the bridge is wrong, and here's why. They said, Thomas, your tone is wrong. They completely shifted the focus from the external reality, the crumbling infrastructure, to his internal psychological state.
They pathologized his dissent.
They pathologized it. It's gaslighting on an institutional scale. It's telling him that the problem isn't that the building is on fire. The problem is that he's shouting about it and making everyone else uncomfortable.
The problem is his anger management issue.
Right. And that is the absolute core of the therapeutic state, a concept the psychiatrist Thomas Szasz was developing decades ago. He argued that the modern state has shifted its entire basis of legitimacy. In the past, the state justified its power through theology, God wills it, or later the rule of law, the Constitution says so. But now, increasingly, the state justifies itself through therapy. Its new slogan is, we are here to keep you safe and healthy and well.
But again, I feel like I have to push back on that, because is that inherently bad? If the government is concerned about the mental well-being of its employees, isn't that a sign of progress? I mean, the General Hospital era was pretty brutal for the average worker. No one's asking for a return to that.
It was incredibly brutal, and nobody is arguing we should go back to unsafe working conditions or complete disregard for human feeling. That's a straw man. But the danger, the real danger, lies in how this language of care and therapy is weaponized. The legal scholar Angela P. Harris talks about this in her work on what she calls the intimate public sphere and governance femininity.
That term, governance femininity, it sounds like a provocation.
It can be interpreted that way, but she's being very specific. She's describing a style of exercising power, not a gender. The old New Deal style of governance, the mid-20th century model, was openly adversarial. It was masculine coded in the traditional sociological sense. You had big labor unions versus corporate titans clashing over hard contracts and legal statutes. It was about rules, rights, and distinct, measurable outcomes.
A very clear power struggle.
The New Deal style, what we see now in Thomas's office, prioritizes process, collaboration, consensus, and feeling.
It prioritizes the meeting over the result of the meeting.
It prioritizes the feeling of the meeting, the harmony. Harris points out that when you replace regulatory enforcement with collaborative research, you effectively stop governing. Instead of a regulator saying to a polluting corporation, stop dumping toxins in this river by Tuesday or we will fine you $1 million a day, they now say, let's form a multi-stakeholder committee to discuss our shared feelings about the river and its ecosystem.
And the corporation is absolutely thrilled because they can sit in that committee for 5 years, talk about their commitment to the environment, and keep polluting the whole time.
This is what's called the pacification technique. The therapeutic language, the wellness workshops, the focus on tone, the deconfliction training, it serves to mask the structural brutality of the system. If you are overworked, underpaid, and watching your department fail because of budget cuts, the therapeutic state doesn't offer you a raise or a policy change or more resources. It offers you resilience training.
Believable. It tells you that your suffering is a failure of your own mindset, a personal failing, not a failure of the system that is grinding you down.
And that puts the burden of adaptation entirely on the individual. If you're unhappy, it's not because the politics are bad or the economics are extractive. It's because you haven't meditated enough. You haven't practiced enough mindfulness. Your perspective is the problem.
And that leads us right back to Thomas's enemy. He is rootless, he is drifting, because the primary mechanism for fixing the world, which is politics, conflict, debate, making hard choices, has been systematically taken away from him and replaced with this gray therapeutic fog. He is left in a padded room where he can't hurt himself, but he also can't fix the damn bridge.
He can't do his job. He can't be a citizen.
So we have this psychological layer, this soft gray wall that suppresses dissent through the language of therapy. But that's just the surface, isn't it? And beneath that, there is a hard, cold economic machinery that is actually running the show. While Thomas is being told to breathe deeply and manage his tone, Someone else, somewhere else, is making the real decisions about where the money goes.
Yes, this is the crucial pivot from the soft power of the clinic to the hard power of the bank. To understand that, we need to talk about a concept called authoritarian liberalism.
That sounds like a complete contradiction in terms. I mean, we are raised to believe that liberalism and democracy are two sides of the same coin. We call our system liberal democracy. So how can you possibly have authoritarian liberalism?
It's a jarring term, but it's historically precise, and it's essential to understanding our current moment. It comes from the work of Michael Wilkinson at the London School of Economics, and it describes a specific type of political system where the state uses authoritarian means, that is, non-democratic power, to protect and enforce the principles of economic liberalism.
So using the iron fist to protect the invisible hand of the market.
Absolutely. The ultimate goal is to insulate the economy, private property, free markets, currency stability, austerity from the irrational and emotional demands of the voters.
To make that more concrete for people, let's look at another story. This one comes from the world of academia, which might seem like a strange place to look for economics, but it really serves as a perfect microcosm for the broader economy. It's a story about a woman named Elena. I saw a story recently from a young academic named Elena who graduated from a prestigious university that once prided itself on rigorous, objective standards. She described how the extreme center has become a shield for a new kind of self-perpetuating elite. In her department, the pursuit of excellence was quietly replaced by the pursuit of balance. She watched as mediocre candidates were promoted over brilliant peers because the brilliant ones held strong views that might upset the institutional equilibrium. Elena realized that the rhetoric of the middle ground was being used to protect a class of administrators who were no longer the best at what they did, but were the best at offending no one. It's a collapse of meritocracy disguised as fairness. Looking at Elena's experience, I feel the sting of her disillusionment. It's a classic right-leaning grievance regarding the loss of objective standards, and while we must be careful not to dismiss the importance of diverse perspectives, we have to acknowledge her reality. When we abandon excellence for the sake of a safe consensus, we aren't creating a fairer society. We are just building a fortress for the powerful to hide behind, where no one is ever allowed to be too good if it makes the collective look bad.
Elena's story is just. It's a perfect illustration of the elite self-preservation mechanism that's at the heart of extreme centrism. Think about it. A true meritocracy, which is what that university claimed to be, is inherently conflict-ridden. It's competitive. You have winners and losers. You have fierce debate. You have the clash of ideas. That is fundamentally dangerous to a ruling class that wants to maintain stability and, above all, maintain its own position.
So balance becomes a weapon. It's not actually about hearing all sides of an issue. It's about ensuring that no one side is loud enough or brilliant enough to rock the boat and challenge the existing hierarchy.
The goal is no longer the best outcome. It's the least controversial one. The goal is to manage risk, and a brilliant, disruptive person is a risk. A mediocre, consensus-driven person is not. But now I want you to take Elena's university department and scale it up to the size of a continent. Because this is exactly what Michael Wilkinson argues has happened to Europe. He calls the European Union, in its current form, a project of authoritarian liberalism.
Now that is a heavy charge to level against the EU. I mean, for most of us, the EU is the ultimate project of peace, cooperation, and democracy.
It is a project of peace, certainly, and that's its great achievement. But Wilkinson argues that its governing logic has shifted from what he calls integration through law to integration through fear. Just think about the Eurozone crisis a decade ago. You had countries like Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal. Their voters, the Staatsvolk, or state people, to use the sociologist Wolfgang Streeck's term, were screaming for relief. They were being crushed by austerity. They went to the polls and voted against it again and again.
They voted for social protection, for stimulus, for an end to the cuts, and the response from the center, from Brussels and Frankfurt.
The response was Tina. There is no alternative. The economic policy of austerity was presented as a non-negotiable reality, like gravity. The European Central Bank, the European Commission, the IMF unelected bodies effectively said to the people of Greece, we don't care what you voted for, the markets require this.
That's the Marktvolk, the market people, winning out.
Streeck's analysis is just devastating here. He says modern Western governments are trying to serve two masters, and it's impossible. On the one hand, you have the Staatsvolk, their citizens, who vote with ballots and want things like public services, healthcare, pensions. On the other hand, you have the Marktvolk, international investors, bondholders, credit rating agencies, who vote with their capital and want one thing: maximum returns, and zero risk.
And extreme centrism pretends to be a neutral referee between the two.
It pretends to be neutral, but when push comes to shove, it systematically, structurally privileges the Marktvolk over the Staatsvolk.
And here's the skeptical liberal in me again. I have to ask, don't they have to do that? I mean, if the bond markets crash, the entire economy collapses, and then the Staatsvolk suffer even more, right? Isn't that just facing up to reality, as unpleasant as it is?
That is the argument the sitter always uses. We are just obeying the laws of economic gravity. But Wilkinson's crucial point is that this structure was designed. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't an act of God. They intentionally built these institutions like independent central banks and supranational courts to place core economic policy beyond the reach of democracy.
They took the most important decisions off the table.
Yes. They constitutionalized a specific brand of economic liberalism, neoliberalism, so that no amount of voting could ever fundamentally change it.
So if I'm a voter in Italy or Spain, I can vote for the left and I get austerity. Or I can vote for the right and I get austerity. My vote can change the culture war policies maybe, but not my economic reality.
Exactly. And that is where the authoritarian part of the term comes roaring back. Because when voters realize that their vote doesn't change the economic reality, they get angry. They protest, they riot, they elect radical parties.
Right.
And how does the state respond? It can't give them what they want economically because the Marktvolk won't allow it. So it has to suppress them. It has to bypass its own parliament. It has to rule by emergency decree. It has to use police power.
Odd. So we end up destroying democracy in order to save capitalism.
That is the grim central irony of our time. And this is not the first time this has happened. This is not a new playbook. Wilkinson and another thinker, Hermann Heller, take us all the way back to the Weimar Republic in the 1930s to show us the blueprint for this crisis.
Weimar, the ultimate political cautionary tale. But usually the story we are told about Weimar is that too much democracy led to Hitler. The masses got emotional and voted for a monster.
That's the conventional wisdom, the one the extreme center loves to tell. But Wilkinson completely flips it. He focuses on the period before Hitler took total power in the early 1930s. He highlights a critical debate between two legal scholars, Hermann Heller, who was a social democrat, and Carl Schmitt, a brilliant but deeply sinister conservative jurist.
Carl Schmitt. Wait, is that the guy who eventually became Hitler's favorite legal theorist?
The very same, the crown jurist of the Third Reich. In 1932, Schmitt was arguing for a strong state. His slogan, and you can hear the echoes today, was strong state, sound economy. He argued that the democratic parliament was too messy, too slow, too beholden to the special interests of workers and the unemployed. To save German capitalism from the Great Depression, he argued, the president needed to suspend democracy and rule by decree. He needed to be a temporary dictator for the sake of economic stability.
He literally wanted to suspend democracy in order to protect the market.
Yes. He was the original authoritarian liberal. And on the other side, Hermann Heller saw exactly where this would lead. He issued this prophetic warning. He said that if you strip the state of its democratic legitimacy, if you tell the people that their voice doesn't matter and that the state exists only to serve the economy, you create a vacuum. You hollow out the state from the inside.
And a hollow state is easily captured by something much, much worse.
But here is the absolute tragedy of it. After World War II, when the architects of post-war Europe were rebuilding, when they were designing the new German Constitution and later the European Union, they didn't listen to Heller. In a strange, twisted way, they listened to Schmitt.
What do you mean by that? How could they possibly listen to a Nazi theorist?
Because they drew the wrong lesson from Weimar. They concluded that the problem was indeed too much democracy. They became terrified of the masses, of the voters. So they built what they called restrained democracy. They created all these insulated technocratic institutions, the strong state that Schmitt wanted, to protect the economy and sound money from the passions of the voters. They thought they were building a firewall against another Hitler.
Odd. By removing the ability of the people to influence their own economic destiny through the ballot box, they recreated the exact conditions of powerlessness and resentment that fuel extremism in the first place.
That is the great misreckoning. They thought they were building a firewall against populism. Instead, they built a pressure cooker. When you bolt down the lid of a pressure cooker and you keep turning up the heat, eventually the whole thing explodes.
This moves us perfectly to the final piece of this puzzle. We've talked about the internal psychology, this therapeutic state. We've talked about the economic machinery, this authoritarian liberalism. But there's a huge external dimension to this too, because if you spend decades telling your citizens that ideology is dead, that we're all on the same team now, and that national identity is an outdated, dangerous concept, What on earth happens when you actually face a real threat from the outside world?
This is the geopolitical paralysis, the vacuum of values at the heart of the project.
I want to take you to one last scene. This is a story about another town hall, but a very different kind from the one we started with.
Okay.
Try to imagine a town hall in a small European city where a debate was held about how to respond to rising external threats and the protection of Western civilizational values, including the historical and moral necessity of supporting allies like Israel. I read about a local teacher who stood up and asked for a clear statement of resolve, a definition of what the community, what the nation actually stood for. He was met with a wall of post-political jargon. The officials argued that taking a firm stance was polarizing and that the most centered path was to remain strategically vague. The teacher felt that his national identity was being dissolved in real time, replaced by a vacuum of commitment that invited the very threats they were afraid to name. It's a chilling narrative of how extreme centrism can paralyze a nation's will to defend itself. When I process this story for my viewers, I recognize the intense, perhaps even nationalist anxiety it stirs. While a pluralistic society must always guard against jingoism, we must also recognize that a neutrality that refuses to distinguish between democratic values and their detractors isn't balance, it's an abdication. The teacher's fear isn't just about politics, it's about the survival of a cultural home that is being bartered away for the sake of a conflict-free afternoon.
Bartered away for the sake of a conflict-free afternoon?
Ugh.
That cuts deep. It reflects what the political theorist Chantal Mouffe calls the post-political consensus.
Post-political. That phrase itself implies that we're finished with politics. Like it's a chapter in a history book. Over, we won.
That is the core fantasy of the extreme center. The belief that with the fall of the Soviet Union, history ended. We defeated the great ideological other, and now we have entered a world of global administration and management. In this worldview, there are no enemies anymore, only partners we haven't convinced yet, or problems to be managed through dialogue and economic integration.
But history didn't end, and enemies most certainly did not disappear.
No, but the post-political mindset stripped the West of the very language needed to identify them. If you truly believe that all conflict is just a misunderstanding or a failure of communication or is rooted in economic grievance, you literally cannot comprehend a bad actor who holds a different worldview and actually wants to destroy you for ideological reasons.
It creates a fundamental strategic blindness.
It does. And this connects directly to the concept of the anti-patriot that was mentioned in that German law journal analysis. This isn't just a slur. It refers to a specific sociological class, the anywheres, as David Goodhart calls them. The kind of people who are equally comfortable in London, Berlin, New York, or Brussels, who work for multinational corporations or NGOs, and who view national identity as an embarrassing primitive relic.
The cosmopolitan elite, the Davos man.
Right. For them, patriotism smells of racism and backwardness. They prefer the clean, abstract, supranational identity, the EU, the UN, the global community. And that's a perfectly valid choice for them. But for the vast majority of people, the somewheres, their national identity, their local community, that is their primary source of security, meaning, and belonging.
So when that teacher stands up in the town hall and asks, what do we stand for? And the official answer is, we stand for international norms and collaborative dialogue. The teacher hears, we stand for nothing that is uniquely ours.
He hears, we will not defend you. And this is the crucial point, especially when it comes to the defense of Western values or the support for allies like Israel. If you cannot define us, if you cannot say we believe in democracy, free speech, the rule of law, and the dignity of the individual, and these things are worth fighting for, then you cannot define them. You cannot define the threat. You are paralyzed by your own ideological refusal to take a side.
And this paralysis, this vacuum, is what drives people directly into the arms of the populists.
Without a single doubt. The center looks at the rise of right-wing populism across the West and asks, why are these people so angry? Why are they so hateful? Why are they so irrational? But they are completely missing the fundamental driver. It is a demand, a desperate cry for the return of politics.
A demand for distinction, a demand for an us and a them.
Yes, the populist leader, for all their flaws, stands up and says, I know who we are, I know who they are, and I will fight for us. That is an incredibly powerful and attractive message to a public that feels dissolved, ignored, and culturally and politically disenfranchised. It offers agency. It offers a side. The center offers a beige, nebulous everyone, which in practice means the interests of the Marktvolk. And when the wolves are at the door, everyone is not a defensible position.
Together. We have the therapeutic state managing our minds and emotions. We have authoritarian liberalism managing our wallets and jobs. And we have this post-political vacuum managing our borders and our national identity. It feels like we are trapped in a single vast machine that is designed to strip us of agency at every level.
It is a machine designed for one purpose, to prevent friction. But friction is how a car moves. Friction is how brakes work. Without friction, you are just sliding uncontrollably.
This brings us to the conclusion and to the work of Karl Polanyi. We really need to talk about his concept of the double movement, because I think it provides the essential roadmap for what happens next.
Polanyi is absolutely essential. He's the key that unlocks the whole thing. Writing in 1944, looking back at the wreckage of 2 world wars and the Great Depression, he analyzed the collapse of 19th century liberal civilization. He theorized that the market and society are in a constant dynamic tension. The market has one impulse: to expand. It wants to turn everything land, labor, money, life itself into a commodity to be bought and sold on the open market. It treats human beings as inputs.
And society, what does it want?
Society wants protection. It wants to remain human. It wants stability, community, tradition, and shelter from the raw, howling wind of the market. Polanyi argued that if the market pushes too far, if it tries to disembed itself completely from social control and treat people like interchangeable parts, society will snap back. That protective reaction is the double movement.
The rubber band snaps.
In a healthy, functioning democracy like Tanaka's General Hospital model, for all its flaws, that snapback happens through the political process. We get the New Deal. We get Social Security. We get unions. We get environmental regulations. We tame the market and re-embed it in society.
But we've just spent the last hour discussing in detail how the extreme center has systematically dismantled all of those democratic mechanisms. They've made economic policy super-constitutional. They've pathologized dissent as a mental health issue. They've locked all the emergency exits.
And that is the terrifying part of the analysis. Because the snapback, the demand for protection, is inevitable. It is a sociological law. Human beings will not accept being treated as mere commodities forever. If the democratic channel for that protective impulse is blocked by the sensible center, the demand for protection will find another channel.
The dark channel.
The dark channel. Fascism. Hypem. Authoritarian strongmen who promise to smash the system that has failed the people. Polanyi's warning is crystal clear. You cannot suppress the social need for protection. You can either manage it democratically with all the messiness and conflict that entails, or you can watch it explode into something monstrous.
So the Centrist Reform Alliance, with its promise of calm, moderation, and into fighting, is actually pouring gasoline on the very extremist fire it claims to be fighting.
By refusing to bend, they are guaranteeing the break. They are turning the general hospital, where diseases can be treated, into a sterile, hermetically sealed clinic. And then they act surprised when the patients start burning it to the ground just to feel something.
Seivin Sato said, "Politics is, by nature, an activity that presupposes a disagreement of opinions." It seems so simple, but we've forgotten it. We've forgotten that disagreement is not a disease of the body politic. It is the immune system of a free society.
And we suppress it at our own profound peril.
If the goal of the new center is to eliminate the friction of politics, we have to ask what provides the traction for society to move forward. A frictionless world is a world where you cannot turn, cannot stop, and cannot change course. We are being offered a politics without conflict, a meritocracy without winners, and a nation without definition. They call it the sensible center. But when you strip away the ability to choose between distinct paths, you aren't left with moderation. You're left with a single, unchangeable direction, marching quietly into a future that nobody voted for.